All right, we're here with the Special Israel Report with Rabbi Moshe Rothchild from just outside of Jerusalem. Rabbi, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Dave?
I'm good. How's the family?
Yeah, good. Everyone's doing great.
Great. As you know, Benjamin Netanyahu is about to give a speech in Congress, and it's a very controversial speech because Barack Obama and his administration seem very upset. Democrats, some of them have threatened to boycott the speech. The Congressional Black Caucus are going to stay away, according to several of them. What is the reaction to Netanyahu's speech in Israel?
Look, people here feel that he has to do it. Of course, you have the left-wing liberal fringe here that doesn't agree with him, but by and large, the mainstream population here in Israel believes that he has to do this. Can you imagine in 1939 if there had been a state of Israel and having an opportunity in 1939 to speak before the Congress to tell them the threat that Hitler posed to the Jewish community, the existential threat he would pose, and not taking advantage of that, not going to speak in front of the Congress in 1939. We feel we're in a similar situation. Like, forget the etiquette. We need to get the word out that Iran is not only an existential threat to Israel. Remember, we're the front lines, but he is going to target the whole world. A nuclear warhead in the hands of Iran is a nuclear warhead in the hands of terrorists. And so people here feel like, our prime minister needs to do whatever he needs to do to get the word out and get people to understand this.
But the Obama administration, starting with Susan Rice, who's the head of the NSA, she says that this is a very, very big interruption in the negotiations that the United States has with Iran to keep a nuclear weapon away from them. What's your response to that?
Well, I think she's right. It is a big interruption. Right now, the way the negotiation's going, Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon, and if there is no interruption, then we're heading down a course of disaster, Dave. And I think she's extremely naive in thinking that the interruption is going to hurt the process.
Secretary of State John Kerry was even more abrasive. He said that way back in about 2002, 2003, Netanyahu told George W. Bush to go to war in Iraq. And he went on to say, well, we all know how that turned out. What is the irony of that? Do you know?
Yeah, well, John Kerry voted for that war.
Ta-da! Not only voted for it, but was quoted as several times on how important it was to remove Saddam.
Right. Well, look, are these people so small-minded that it's as if Netanyahu kowtows them to going to war? I mean, they don't make their own decisions? I mean, that's how democracies work. People speak up, and then leaders make decisions. You can't silence someone with a strong opinion. I mean, it's so un-American what's going on.
I asked you this question on their last interview. Did Netanyahu notify the White House that he was coming, or didn't he?
The New York Times reported originally that Netanyahu did not notify, John Boehner did not notify the White House that Netanyahu was coming. Then I believe it was February 15th, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, the New York Times definitely retracted that, and the New York Times published a report saying that John Boehner had informed the White House in advance that Netanyahu would be invited.
Should Netanyahu have, independently of John Boehner, should he have notified the White House?
Well, if the New York Times reports is correct that John Boehner told the White House, I assume that John Boehner told Netanyahu that he informed the White House. I mean, I don't know protocols. I would assume that John Boehner would have told Netanyahu that he told the White House.
Let's switch bases here, and let's talk about ISIS for a moment. When does ISIS become a real threat to Israel?
Well, I mean, they already are. I mean, here in Israel, they've arrested some of the local population with ISIS flags. And look, we have our own radicalized Islamists here. They're called Hamas. They're called Hezbollah, sitting on the border of Lebanon. They're all the same, Dave. Let's not kid ourselves. ISIS, suddenly is, the world recognized ISIS as a terrorist group. Hamas is no different. Hezbollah is no different. So maybe they don't behead people, but what do? They'll attach someone by a chain to the back of a car and drag them through Gaza and kill their own people. They just came out with a poll. 90% of the Gazans, the Arabs who live in Gaza, oppose the Hamas. 90%, but they would never say that publicly. These are like secret polls.
I'm here with Israel Special Report from Rabbi Moshe Rothchild from just outside of Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi, Netanyahu is going to give a speech. It's probably going to be telling the world that how dangerous it is for Iran to get a nuclear weapon, not just for Israel, but for other places and the world in general. My question is, aren't a lot of the Arab countries, a lot of the Muslim countries in the Middle East, aren't they scared of a nuclear Iran?
Oh, of course. That's the whole problem, Dave. If Iran goes nuclear, Saudi Arabia is not far behind, and not far behind them will be all the other Middle Eastern countries. And suddenly you're going to have a nuclear-armed Middle East. And come on, is that what anybody wants, to have a nuclear-armed Middle East? Iran is one of the world's biggest sponsors of terror. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that will get into the hands of Al-Qaeda, that will get into the hands of ISIS, it will get into the hands of the terror groups. That is exactly the problem, and we are being so small-minded to waste so much time on should Netanyahu speak, should he not speak. It's not about that. It's about letting Israel, who is on the front lines of terror, have a voice in the United States, because we need to stand together, because this is not Israel's problem. This is a world problem. Terrorists, if they get nuclear weapons, we will regret the day that we signed any of these very weak treaties with Iran.
John Kerry, Secretary of State, just said that 2014 was the safest year against terrorism for United States citizens, for America, that's ever been. And yet later, his head of intelligence, James Clapper, said he has never seen it worse. What's going on amongst the administration? What's going on amongst the Obama administration to where they don't know which end is talking?
Well, I think they're afraid to call a spade a spade. I mean, they won't use the term terrorists when it comes to, they won't refer to it as religious-based terrorism. You know, they have this new language they're developing, and I hate to be this harsh, but the Nazis did something similar. They introduced all these euphemisms into the language, and it seems that they're having trouble identifying who the enemy is.
Well, do you know who they really identified, the enemy, who they say is the real enemy, the real threat to this government?
Who the United States says is the real enemy?
Yeah, conservatives. I'm serious. They're the real threat.
I don't know if you saw it today, Dave, but a senior Iranian official today threatened to wipe Tel Aviv and Haifa off the map. That's what he said.
Well, that's just repeating what Ahmadinejad said.
Right. Correct.
Also,
but my point is that anyone who's naive to think that the new president, Rouhani of Iran, is any more of a moderate than his predecessor was, is just kidding themselves.
Are you familiar with the Iranian war games that just took place?
No.
Iran, actually, there's a video on DaveWeinbaum.com that shows Iran in a FA war game attacking a U.S. aircraft carrier and blowing it up. And this just came out yesterday.
Dave, I just want to make one very important point for your listeners, because you have a lot of anti-Semites out there, people who are against Jews or anti-Israel, whatever you want to call it, who will claim, and you see a lot of comics to this effect, they make these cartoons, that Israel is trying to egg on the United States to fight Israel's war because the threat is only against Israel. Let's just be crystal clear once again that the threat of a nuclear Iran is a threat to the entire world. Remember, it was the terrorists, it was Al-Qaeda who attacked the World Trade Center and destroyed it, and the Pentagon. Imagine if Al-Qaeda had a nuclear weapon. They will use it in New York. They will use it in L.A. I'm not sure if they're going to drop it on Rolla, Missouri, but they will go for the big cities.
Why is President Obama seeming to back Iran having a nuclear weapon?
Well, I'm not sure I would say that he's backing Iran having a nuclear weapon. He seems to be afraid of any kind of confrontation that's going to force him to take a stand. We know that right now, the allies of the United States don't trust Obama. Like when in Syria, when he said there was a red line, if they used chemical weapons, he would get involved militarily. But we know that Syria used chemical weapons, and the United States didn't do anything. So when the United States says they're going to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Israel, and other allies of the United States, countries like Turkey, they don't trust Obama. Obama. That's the real problem.
All right, we're here with Rabbi Moshe Rothchild from just outside of Jerusalem in Israel, and this is the Special Israel Report. Thank you, Rabbi Moshe Rothchild.
Thanks again for having me, Dave.
Now, I want to remind folks...
visit in person.
I want to remind folks the rabbi is a tour guide in Israel, and he give you a good deal, give you such a deal. And he's great for not only Jewish people, but for Christians, too. You can ask my Christian girlfriend. Anyways, thank you so much, Rabbi Moshe Rothchild. We'll look forward to seeing you in the studio in a couple weeks. God bless.
God bless, Dave.